The Sixth Symphony is as different from the Fifth as you can imagine, and yet these two works ultimately complement one another. Whereas the Fifth Symphony is concise and concentrated, the Sixth is expansive and leisurely. But more importantly, the Sixth is a programmatic work, a characteristic symphony that reflects Beethoven's love of nature. For Beethoven, the natural world was a sanctuary that offered solace for his loneliness and his deafness. In a letter to his friend Therese Malfatti from May 1810, Beethoven writes, "No one can love the country as much as I do, for surely woods, trees, and rocks give back the echo which man desires to hear." And on a sketch sheet from the same year, he muses, "My unfortunate hearing does not torment me here." Beethoven's personal experience of the healing power of nature was also consonant with contemporary views about nature as a manifestation of the divine. The Lutheran theologian Christoph Christian Sturm gave voice to these views in a book called Reflections on the Works of God and His Providence Throughout All Nature, which celebrates the divine logic that he believes underlies the marvels of the natural world, from the human anatomy to the planetary system. Sturm writes, "All the arrangements of thy providence, however extraordinary they may sometimes appear to my limited understanding, are supremely wise and good." This book must have produced quite an impression on Beethoven, as he made numerous annotations in his copy of the work. Moreover, if you look at the manuscript of the Pastoral Symphony, Beethoven writes at the start of the finale, "benevolent feelings of gratitude to the divinity after the storm," which seems to convey that the composer has a similar reverential attitude towards the natural world. In Western art music, there was a long-standing pastoral tradition stretching back to the Baroque, and over time there accumulated a repertoire of conventional pastoral gestures that Beethoven could draw upon, such as bagpipe drones, folk tunes and dances, and bird calls. But the challenge for Beethoven was to figure out how to incorporate these pastoral gestures into a symphony without relying on them so heavily that the whole work turns into an insipid pastoral cliché. Beethoven conceives each movement as a vignette from a day in the country. In the first movement, we arrive in the country and we begin to feel quite happy about it. The second movement is a beautiful depiction of a scene by the brook. In the third movement, peasants gather for a good time. But their gathering is disrupted by a violent thunderstorm. After the storm is over, we hear a shepherd's song full of joy and gratitude. Even though there are 5 movements in total, the thunderstorm could also be understood as both a dramatic and structural disruption of what would otherwise be a typical 4-movement symphonic plan, with a first movement sonata form, a slow movement in a contrasting key, a scherzo and trio, and a finale in sonata rondo form. Curiously, Beethoven's 5-movement pastoral program does not seem to be completely original. Back in 1784, a composer named Justin Heinrich Knecht published a 5-movement symphony called Le Portrait musical de la nature that similarly incorporates a storm, after which nature herself rejoices in a hymn of thanksgiving. In fact, works with programs similar to Beethoven's Pastoral Symphony were quite numerous. At least 27 such works from 1773 to 1797 have been identified. Beethoven was likely aware of these precedents, and he was quick to point out to his publisher that his Pastoral Symphony is different. Beethoven writes that the title of the symphony in F is Pastoral Symphony or Recollections of Country Life, more the expression of feeling than tone painting. That last bit gives us the key to understanding what Beethoven was trying to accomplish with this symphony. Even though there are instances of tone painting in the symphony whereby the sounds of country life are directly depicted in the music, Beethoven's overarching aim was to integrate these pictorial devices into the framework of the symphony and thereby demonstrate that he could write program music on a large scale and achieve the same level of structural coherence as in his previous symphonies. Cast in sonata form, the first movement is characterized by extended passages of rhythmic and motivic repetition. The main theme unfolds at a leisurely pace, and this music seems perfectly suited to portraying the awakening of cheerful feelings in the title. The very first sound that we hear is a fifth in the lower strings, evoking the bagpipe drones of folk music. Above this drone fifth, the first violins present a graceful tune that seems to be in no great hurry to get going. We already come to a pause on the dominant after only 4 measures. Then the theme slowly gathers energy as if rousing from a peaceful slumber. What's remarkable is that the pause on the dominant in measure 4 becomes greatly prolonged in measure 16, as a short ascending motive is stated 10 times over the dominant pedal. Listening to this music on vinyl, you might think that the needle has become stuck in a groove. In the absence of dense, complex musical discourse, our attention is drawn to the variety of instrumental colors, like absorbing the details of a beautiful landscape. By measure 37, the theme is presented in its full glory. We've arrived in the country, and the whole scenery has come alive. You'll notice that the harmonic language has been very simple, making us feel like we've entered a pristine, unsophisticated world. The subordinate theme conveys a similar impression. It begins with a 4-measure idea that is derived from the main theme. This idea is repeated numerous times as it is transferred to different registers and taken up by different instruments. It seems remarkable that Beethoven can spend so much time relishing such a simple little idea, but sometimes, as in real life, the simplest little things are cherished the most. The development section is more like an anti-development section. It lowers rather than raises tension. First of all, it begins and ends with a soothing subdominant focus. And throughout the section, there is scarcely any hint of the minor mode. Rather, we are allowed to luxuriate in long stretches of major harmonies and enjoy the occasional harmonic changes involving wondrous chromatic third relations. So to summarize, the first movement portrays our positive emotional response to being surrounded by nature. In contrast, the second movement is a scene, a depiction of our natural surroundings rather than our psychological state. In 1803, Beethoven sketched the preliminary idea for this movement, consisting of 2 phrases. Significantly, he wrote under the phrases, "The greater the brook, the deeper the tone." This already gives us an insight into how the movement will eventually take shape. As the brook widens and deepens into a river, the orchestral forces also become more powerful. So this movement essentially gives us the sonic equivalent of a landscape painting. In the background is the constant flow of the brook, depicted by the continuous flowing motion in the middle and lower strings. In the foreground are distinctive melodic figures and, later, trills that evoke bird calls. The movement unfolds in sonata form, and the initial depiction of a gentle brook with a few birds above it is transformed in the recapitulation, where we can imagine that the brook has grown into a river because the same material is now richly presented in full orchestra. By the way, according to Anton Schindler, the rising arpeggio is supposed to represent the call of the yellow hammer. But it is the coda that features one of the most memorable instances of tone painting in the entire symphony, an ensemble cadenza of tree birds which Beethoven helpfully identifies for us: a nightingale, a quail, and a cuckoo. The last three movements make up a continuous sequence depicting a dramatic situation. A happy gathering of peasants is interrupted by a storm. Then, after the storm subsides, the shepherd offers a song of thanksgiving. The scherzo portrays the merry gathering of country folk by evoking peasant dance music. This music is all about vivacious contrasts. The first part of the scherzo introduces two themes that are contrasting in tonality and articulation. The opening theme in F major is light and detached, and it's followed immediately by a smooth counter theme in D major. In the second part of the scherzo, the oboe plays a syncopated melody above light accompaniment in the violins. At the cadences, the bassoon joins in with 3 or 4 notes. There may be a humorous story behind the bassoon's sporadic playing. Anton Schindler tells us that Beethoven once witnessed country musicians occasionally falling asleep while playing, then waking up and playing a few notes before going back to sleep again. Perhaps this is what Beethoven was thinking about when he wrote the bassoon part. In contrast to the triple meter of the scherzo, the trio is in 2/4. It's heavily accented and sounds like a vigorous foot-stamping peasant dance. There is a folk-like modal feel to this music as well. Although F is the tonal center, we also hear E-flat repeatedly, and this implies the Mixolydian mode. The return of the scherzo fails to conclude. The last dominant seventh harmony does not resolve to the tonic as expected, but instead gives way to a mysterious low D-flat tremolo, like distant thunder. Having the scherzo abruptly cut off by the storm is brilliantly effective because, as in real life, a storm could happen at any moment and disrupt outdoor activities. So you can just imagine everyone scattering and running for shelter. To fully appreciate how powerful Beethoven's storm music is, it's useful to compare it with the storm in Knecht's Le Portrait musical de la nature from 25 years earlier. You could describe this as aristocratic storm music. It's dramatic enough to evoke the elements, but not so violent as to upset a listener's refined sensibilities. There seems to be little danger here of getting drenched, battered, and completely terrified. Beethoven, in contrast, wants us to experience the storm in all its sublime intensity. Up to this point in the symphony, there have been no extended passages in the minor. Even minor harmonies have been uncommon. But now all the drama of the minor mode is suddenly unleashed in the storm. Moreover, the trombones and the timpani will play for the very first time in the symphony, and they will add awesome power to this music. After the distant rumbling of the low D-flat, staccato running eighth notes suggest the first drops of rain. The storm breaks out in full force in measure 21, where the low strings create a chaotic rumbling with quintuplet sixteenths in the cellos against regular sixteenths in the basses. The trombones and timpani announce their presence with a powerful blast. Then lightning flashes in the first violins. Beginning in measure 95, a chromatic line in the strings suggests strong wind. This impression is especially enhanced by the shrill piccolo crescendo on a single held note. The storm reaches its climax on a diminished seventh chord in measure 107, then gradually subsides to pianissimo. In a remarkable transformation, the staccato figure that represented the initial raindrops reappears, but now augmented into a smooth chorale in C major. This chorale passage creates a seamless transition into the finale. Indeed, listening to this music without looking at the score, it would be difficult to tell where the finale really begins. Cast in sonata rondo form, the finale is permeated by a wonderful sense of contentment and serenity. The movement begins with the clarinets and horns evoking Alp horns playing a Ranz der Wasch, a simple melody traditionally played by Swiss alpine herdsmen. This material will keep recurring at key moments in the movement. The refrain is a heartwarming theme of mainly triadic simplicity. Every time the refrain recurs, the theme is always presented multiple times, each time in a richer texture. The falling arpeggiation of the subordinate theme recalls the analogous spot in the first movement. And like in the first movement, there is a soothing subdominant focus in the development section. Then the refrain appears with the melody elaborated in moving 16th notes. The coda culminates in resounding harmonies as we are overwhelmed by the glory of nature and feel grateful for being alive to enjoy it. The movement concludes with the Rans der Wasch, but now the call of the Alp horns is sounding in the tonic like a majestic reverberation throughout a peaceful landscape. Thanks for watching.